Hello, everyone. Welcome to Phillies Extra, the baseball interview show from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm your host, Scott Lauber, and I write about the Phillies in Major League Baseball for the Inquirer and Inquirer.com. If you're tuning in for the first time, we couldn't be happier to have you. As always, the show is available to watch on YouTube, Facebook, X, or our website by clicking over to the Inquirer live page. But if you're on the go, let's say you're in the car, heading down to the shore, dial us up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and take us with you. And no matter where you are or how you found us, I want to thank you very much for spending some of your time with us. I'm super excited to have John Middleton as my guest this week. As you probably know, John is the Phillies managing partner, chief executive officer, the man at the top of the masthead. The buck, or as the case is the case this year, $300 million for luxury tax purposes, stops with him. And I promise that we'll get his thoughts on the first half of the season, the trade deadline looming at the end of the month, and the Phillies being in a World Series or bust stage of their life cycle. But the biggest reason that I wanted to invite John here this week is because of something that's going to happen on Sunday, July 27th, in the charming village of Cooperstown in upstate New York. Dick Allen, among the most preeminent sluggers not only in Phillies history, but in all of baseball in the 60s and early 1970s, will be posthumously inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. He'll be joined in the class of 2025 by Ichiro Suzuki, CC Sabathia, friend of the show Billy Wagner, and if you missed our interview with him a few weeks ago, please go back and check out that episode, and the late Dave Parker. Now, I had the privilege of being in the hotel ballroom in Dallas with Allen's son, Richard Jr., on the night of December 8th, when the election results of the Classic Era Committee were announced. And in that moment, as I watched the emotions spill out of Richard Jr. and his friends and family, I thought about all the people who've advocated on Dick's behalf over the years for the Hall of Fame. Mark Carfagno, the former groundskeeper at the Vet, who became really close friends with Allen and literally led a campaign to get him into the Hall of Fame. Mike Tolan, the filmmaker who championed Allen's cause. Jim Cott, Mike Schmidt, Larry Christensen, Larry Boa, and all the other former teammates who will spend hours and hours regaling you with stories about Allen's light tower power at Connie Mack Stadium and later at the Vet. But Middleton was one of the first people that I called because as I've gotten to know him over the years, I've heard him talk passionately, eloquently, and quite often about the impact that Dick Allen made on his baseball fandom. We all had a favorite player growing up, the guy that we pretended to be when we played wiffle ball in our backyard. For Middleton, it was Dick Allen, and it was no wonder. Middleton was 9 years old when Allen hit 29 home runs for the 1964 Phillies and was named National League Rookie of the Year. On family vacations down the shore, Middleton would bring a transistor radio to assure that he didn't miss a Dick Allen at-bat. As Middleton once told me, quote, "It was the first time I'd ever heard someone described as a phenom. We all wanted to be just like Dick Allen." But like a lot of our heroes, Allen had a complicated legacy, one that was shaped in many ways by the times he played in. He was a superstar black athlete amid racial unrest in the country and in Philadelphia. He was mistreated, sometimes even by his own teammates. He received threats, and he put up defenses against those things, as we all would. Oftentimes, he was misunderstood, cast as surly or standoffish or difficult to deal with. But you talk to enough people who were around him all those years, and they tell you a lot of that was hearsay, that Dick Allen was a good teammate and Dick Allen was a great player. Middleton can recite the stats. Here's one of his favorites. From 1964 to 1974, Allen slugged .554 with a .940 OPS, second in both categories to only Hank Aaron at .561 and .941. Only Aaron and Billy Williams had more extra base hits than Dick Allen during that 11-year period. It was Middleton's idea in September 2020 to put Allen's number 15 in the rafters with the Phillies' other retired numbers. Number one, it would be a recognition of Dick Allen's career, but also it was to help illuminate his Hall of Fame chances. Unfortunately, the meeting of the committee to consider his candidacy in 2020 was postponed because of COVID, and Allen passed away that December. So when the call finally came on that Sunday night last December, 47 years after Allen played his last major league game, I reached out to Middleton. As I expected, he was emotional. He told me he was in a state of shock, and he said he never thought it would happen because it should have happened so long ago. Middleton will be there in Cooperstown for the induction to celebrate with Allen's family, and he's planning to honor Allen later in the summer at Citizens Bank Park. There isn't a better time then to invite John Middleton in to get his memories of Allen, both as a player and a person, and to discuss Allen's legacy in Philadelphia and his impact on fans from Middleton's generation. We'll get into all of that and more. You'll want to stick with us through the whole conversation too, because he had some very interesting things to say about the upcoming trade deadline. And after we're done, I'll bring in my colleague Lachlan March to preview the second half of the Phillies season. As always, I'll take a question at the end. Let's get right to it then. Here's my sit down with John Middleton. John Middleton, welcome to Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you so much for being with me.
Delighted to be here, Scott.
I mentioned this in the introduction, but it really bears repeating. You were one of my first calls that night in December in Dallas when Dick Allen got elected to the Hall of Fame by the Contemporary Era Committee. And that was because I know how much he meant to you, first as a star player with the Phillies, and then when you were growing up, and then later as a friend. He came into your life when you were 9, I think, in 1964, which happens to be the same age that my son is now. So as I was telling you before, I think I kind of see things through a 9-year-old prism sometimes. And I've been thinking a lot about you at that age and what it must have been like to see Dick Allen, this phenomenon, this home run hitter, from the perspective of a baseball-loving kid growing up around Philadelphia in the 60s. What was it that appealed to you about Dick Allen?
Well, you used the word phenom, and he really was the first 5-tool phenom that I saw with the Phillies. And they had some very good players. Johnny Callison, right fielder, Jim Bunning, Chris Short as pitchers. But Dick was just a sensational baseball player. And Philadelphia, I was born in 55, so I started, really following the Phillies, watching them with my father. 1960, but 61 was, at that age, you kind of become more and more aware of players and the team and detailed ways that, and they weren't very good then. Actually, they were quite bad. So even though we had some good players, we didn't have what I would call a core and a nucleus. And Dick being the fourth player there. And Tony Taylor was good too, but those were the 4 key guys, and Dick was the best. So he was a significant addition to that original grouping of 3. And by 9, I was fully cognizant of the Phillies and their batting. I was reading the paper on a regular basis. I was looking at the box scores. I was comparing our players to the other teams' players. There used to be in the box scores in the Inquirer, like the top 10, they do the top 10 in batting average and home runs and RBIs for the 2 legs. And I was always looking where our guys were on those lists. So it was just, when he stepped into the stage there in late 63, but really 64 was when he started. Because I think he played 12 games or something like that in 63. But in 64, when he was a rookie, he was transcendent. I mean, he was the runaway choice for the Rookie of the Year. He placed highly in the MVP balloting too. I mean, he was as real a deal as you could get in baseball back then.
I wish we still printed those top 10 lists. And I can't tell you how many readers of ours email me all the time and say, where are the leaders? Where are the standings? So no, you're right. Growing up when I did in the 80s, it was the same thing. It was looking at all those lists and seeing those names stick out. And with Dick, it was the home runs, right? Let's talk about those home runs because, people have said to me, like, look, there was no Sports Center back then, and there certainly weren't smartphones. So, like, at the push of a button or, the swipe of your finger, you couldn't just dial up highlights back then. So you either saw Dick Allen, who was Richie Allen at that time, right? You either saw him swing that 40-ounce bat and hit one over the Coca-Cola sign at Connie Mack Stadium, or you took the word of somebody who did. Or maybe you took the word of the description of the radio announcer who gave that to you. And because of that, I think we sometimes wonder about sluggers from that era and earlier. And we say, like, did that happen? Was that a tall tale? Well, you've heard enough about the Dick Allen home runs, the magnificence of those home runs to know that they happened. I've heard Larry Shank tell the story now so many times about Dick hit the home run off Larry Jackson of the Cubs in '65, and Larry Shank went out there and tried to estimate how far it went, and somehow, some way, they came up with 529 feet. But what was, I guess, was there a jaw-dropping Dick Allen homer that you remember as a kid that that kind of was like, okay, this guy is special. He's not just any other player.
Yeah. So I was not there the day he put one out over the Coke sign, which stood on top of the roof in the left center field. But I was there when he put one over the roof, not the Coke sign, but the roof. And I was there when he put one out dead center field, which was a long fly ball back there in the Connie Mack Stadium. Bill Jenkinson, who's a baseball historian, said in the brochure that I put together for Dick's candidacy for the Hall of Fame, I quoted Bill. He said, quote, "The only person in the entire history of the game who may have had an edge on Dick Allen for pure power is Babe Ruth." I mean, that's how extraordinary he was, and you got to see that on a regular basis. Now, unfortunately, back in the mid '60s, they didn't have television. They weren't televised on a lot of games, so you saw a little bit of it. You might see some highlight reels on news at night or something like that, and you'd see pictures, photographs in the paper. But you didn't really, they didn't have ESPN, and they didn't have the internet where you could go and Google Dick Allen's 10 best home runs or something like that. So if you went to the games enough, you saw one, because and I tell you what, he hit some outs that were really loud and really long too. So it was amazing to watch the guy. I mean, nobody got up from their seat when Dick Allen was at bat.
Yeah.
You just didn't, because you never knew when he was. It's kind of like with Ryan Howard when he was there. Just and more recently with Bryce. I mean, and Schwarber. I mean, when they're at bat, you never know when they're going to go off.
Yeah.
When they go off, it's amazing.
Yeah. Our friend Jim Salisbury calls those hold it hitters, because if you have to go to the bathroom, you hold it until they're done.
Okay.
You can't talk about Dick Allen without, I think, talking about the times in which he played and the conditions that he endured. And his great friend Mark Carfagno once told me a story that he was sitting with Dick, and Dick took a meatball sandwich and he put it on a lamp to show him how he had to heat up the takeout food that Pete Serra, the equipment manager, would smuggle back to the hotel from restaurants that wouldn't serve him. And that's just the beginning of it, because there was the verbal abuse that he took and the threats that he received. And how much do you think kind of the racial climate in the country and in Philadelphia at the time really contributed to some of the perceptions about Dick, as whether it was surly or standoffish, or people accused him of being a bad teammate, more interested in other things than winning games? It just seems like a lot of that was hearsay in a lot of ways, because it was sort of a reflection of the times that he played in, unfortunately.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, Scott, the early '60s, that time period was a very bad time in this country racially. The Great Society was being pushed by Lyndon Johnson in about that time. The civil rights movement was getting started. You had, the marches in Selma. You had, National Guards, forcing integration down in schools. And Philadelphia has been called like the northernmost southern city. And the race relations in Philadelphia in the early '60s were bad. There were some very bad riots in North Philadelphia in '63. and so two things. One is, Dick really wasn't welcomed here the way a sports superstar should have been welcomed, because of his race. And people and not only that, they treated him terribly. I mean, just unconscionably badly. But everything he did and everything he said was kind of seen through that prism of racism. So, I mean, he was never getting the benefit of any doubt with a lot of people. And I hate to say it, Scott, but it was, you'd see it in the reporters too. I mean, it wasn't just the fans in the stands. It was it was really endemic and systemic. The thing I remember in that regard is, usually my dad and I were sitting in the bleachers, but for some reason, one game we were down in the second row, kind of just to the first base side of the dugout. And when Dick walked off the field between innings to come back to the dugout, somebody threw a Coke bottle that just missed my father and me and landed, a few feet from Dick. And just people wonder, like, well, why is he, wearing a batting helmet on the field? Well, that's why. They weren't throwing marshmallows at him or donuts. They were throwing Coke bottles and, wads of, rolled up wads of nickels and quarters and things like that. It was terrible. He never got away from it. I mean, it happened at the stadium, but then when he went home, he had the same thing. I mean, hate letters that were being delivered into his mailbox, death threats on the phone and letters, people dumping his garbage on his front yard, doing donuts on his front yard. His daughter was nearly hit in the head by a rock that was thrown through the living room window. I don't know. When people would talk to me about, Dick being a difficult person, while he was playing, I said, my God, if that happened to me, I thought Dick was actually remarkably restrained given what he went through. Because I don't think I could have been as nearly as restrained as Dick if that had happened to me and to my family. So I don't think there's any question that he got a bad rap and an unfair rap that was largely driven by the times that he lived in, and also the location. I think he could have been in other cities that would have been much easier for Dick than Philadelphia was in 1964.
Yeah.
And the thing I also would point out to people, there's this character clause for the Hall of Fame, and everybody would kind of use that as to say, well, Dick really doesn't deserve to be in there. But character in people is really shown over decades. It's over their lifetime, and not in any small finite number of years, at a period of their life. And when Dick retired, he spent his time going around visiting people around the country and apologizing to them for maybe things that he had done to them, asking forgiveness, telling them that he forgave them. I mean, you have to remember, in 65, in batting practice, in I think it was July, maybe in August, it was the summer, Frank Howard took a baseball bat and destroyed his shoulder. I mean, how do you, Frank Howard, Thomas, excuse me, how do you do that? I mean, why do you, I can't imagine a teammate doing that to another teammate. And not only that, but Dick was hitting 25 or something like that. And then he was hurt. He sat out for a while, and when he came back, he was still hurt. He had like 240 or 50 for the rest of the season. Yeah. And yet he forgave Frank, and he went up to see him, and they exchanged Christmas cards for decades afterwards. To me, that's his character. That's the true character. He taught me more about forgiveness and Christian love than pretty much any preacher I ever listened to on a Sunday from the pulpit. He was amazing what he did, and he deserves credit. And so the point I kept making to people who, up in Cooperstown, is this is a guy whose character should be emulated. It should be honored, and it should be used as an example for people for how you should be living your life. He was a great guy. I mean, he was a wonderful human being. The man I knew.
Yeah. We know how much Dick detested self-promotion, but so many people advocated on his behalf over the years for the Hall of Fame, from Mark Carfagno to David Fletcher in Chicago, Mike Tolan, and others. With the retirement of number 15 back in 2020, the Phillies got, to not only celebrate Dick's legacy with him there in attendance, but also I think to maybe do some campaigning for him for the Hall of Fame. We were all disappointed, I think, that year when the committee that was supposed to meet did not meet because of COVID, and they postponed that and pushed it off. But I mean, did you sort of see it that way? Like it was an opportunity to sort of not only honor him for the career that he had here, but also maybe tout him for what was a long overdue achievement to get into the Hall of Fame.
So, short answer is yes and yes. The longer answer, I think, really begins just before COVID. COVID had started, it was before the world shut down with COVID, and down in Clearwater in March. And Mike Tolan was down, had gone to a couple of games, and after one of the games said to me, "I'd like to talk to you." So we sat down in my office, and he told me that Dick had cancer. And I talked to Mike over the years about trying to get him into the Hall of Fame and retiring his number at some point. And frankly, I had hoped that he'd be able to get into the Hall of Fame first, and then we could retire his jersey as part of the celebration of that honor. But Mike told me, he said, he has cancer. It's not going well. I don't know how long he's going to live, John. And we made the decision, Mike and I made the decision at that meeting, that we would find a time in 2020 to retire his jersey, and pick the day that was the anniversary of his first game in Major League Baseball for the Phillies, which I think was September 5th, if my memory is right. But in any event, we did that. And, if you go back to listen to my speech, I talk about his stats compared to Hall of Famers, and they're mind-boggling. And I'm going to not get them all correct, but I think it was his slugging percentage. He's like 17th in the history of Major League Baseball, tied with Willie Mays. If you look at his OPS plus, and particularly the 11 years that were his prime years, his OPS was 1/1000th of a point less than Hank Aaron, and it was higher than everybody else who played. So, and you got to go back and look at who, Frank Howard was playing then, and Yastrzemski was playing then, and Frank Robinson was playing then, and he was better than all of them. And you could look at his OPS plus over time, which measures over time, and same thing. He's like 30th or something like that. It's just, these are staggering numbers, and you look at the Hall of Fame first baseman or third baseman and where he falls in that, slugging percentage and home, I talked about that in my speech, and it was a way of saying, hey guys, he's not just with these guys, he's at the top of the list of Hall of Famers. And it took a while, but they finally voted him in, which is great. And I'm grateful to the Hall. I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. I'm thankful and eternally grateful to the Hall for what they did to honor Dick.
Yeah, the sad part, right, of course, is that it should have happened long ago so that he could enjoy it. But yeah, you and I talked about it that night back in December. Just the, it had gone on for so long, and he'd gone through so many cycles, not just on the writer's ballot, but then so many committee cycles that weren't sure it was ever going to happen. Yeah,
I always had hope, Scott, that he get in, because I thought he was so clearly a Hall of Famer. And the only thing, Mike, if you ask Mike Schmidt, because if you read Mike Schmidt's speech at the jersey retirement ceremony, he talked about how it was the attitude, the people, this character issue that we talked about, and his attitude that people, frankly, in Mike's view, kept him out. That's the only thing that's kept him out for all these years. So, but I'm really grateful that he's in. Just really thankful to the Hall.
So I need to ask you quickly about the first half of this Phillies season. I think I said this to you earlier. If I told you in spring training that Bryce Harper would miss some time with an injury, Aaron Nola would struggle and then miss some time, Jose Alvarado would be suspended and unavailable for 80 games, and that you'd still be in first place at the All-Star break. If I had told you that in spring training, what would you have said?
I would have said you're crazy, Scott. But I think it's really a testimony to the team, the balance of the team, the depth of the team. Certainly, Rob's done a terrific job, and our pitching staff has been superb. You legitimately have three pitchers who Could have, if they had been able to be eligible for the All-Star game, they could have reasonably all been expected to start the game. They're all in the conversation about Cy Young awards at the end of the year. And we've, Trey's been terrific, and Kyle's been Kyle, as we all saw on Tuesday night. It's been really, really good. And some, Marsh has had a good, since early May. He's played well. JT's come on more recently. So, if these guys can continue, and then Price's wrist stays healthy, and and he can start hitting again the way he can hit when he's healthy, I mean, we'll be in good shape. We need to trade deadlines coming up. We need to do something if we can. It's difficult. The demand is high, the availability is low, so supply and demand is out of whack here, and that drives up the prices. And at some point, you may look at things and say, it's not worth it. And then the other problem is, is you can push every button correctly and you still don't win. And
right.
I look at the job that Ruben did in 09, 10, and 11, and he was great. I mean, the trades he made at the trading deadlines, the moves he made in the off season, honestly, you give him an A+ for every single move. And the players that he brought in delivered. I mean, Cliff Lee was great, and Pedro was important for the couple of months that he pitched for us. And then he signs Roy, and he brings in Roy Halladay, and then he brings in Roy Oswalt in the middle of 10, and Hunter Pence in 11. And these guys all performed well, and yet we didn't win. And that's the other thing you have to keep in mind, that it's easy to say go out and get somebody, but then you have to live with the consequences. And you don't want to trade another Ryan Sandberg away just to try to complete a deal in July of 2025.
Yeah,
that killed us for over a decade.
Yeah, and look, you and I talked right in spring training about the balancing act of being an all-in, win-now kind of team, and you get to the trade deadline and you might be looking at the possibility of acquiring a difference-making player, and that push-pull of how far in do we push a big chip to get a difference-making player. And I would think that that's probably a major topic of conversation right now.
Actually, it has been for the last 2 years as well. Not just at the trading deadline last 2 years, but the off seasons too. I mean, look, a year ago we made a great offer for Crochet. I mean, an incredible offer. I mean, it was almost painful to look at what we were giving up. And frankly, Dave looked at me at one point and said, "John, I'm totally ambivalent. If they take the deal, I'm happy. If they don't take the deal, I'm happy. I'm not going to give them another player. I'm not going to up the ante at all in any way, shape, or form. I'd like to make the deal, but if they don't want to do it," and I felt the same way. I mean, it's just at some point you have to just say enough's enough, and we're not going to just completely mortgage the future for today, because the players, we're going to be playing baseball in 5 years from now and 10 years from now, and we're going to want the fans to be excited. And if you empty the cupboard and you don't win, it's one thing if you empty the cupboard and you win, but there's absolutely no guarantee you're going to win if you do that, as witness 9, 10, and 11.
Yeah.
So you just got to be careful.
Okay, let me get you out of here on this by getting back to Dick Allen. When I called you that Sunday night in December, you were pretty emotional about the election results, which, you were on the phone with Richard Jr. as well, right after he found out, and being in the room, I was in the room, and that was something special to experience and to see them experience. You're going up to Cooperstown for the induction. What are the emotions going to be like? Just sort of sharing that with Dick's family and with the Phillies family, and to see this day kind of come to fruition. Unfortunately, without Dick being there, but
as you know, I actually started crying when I heard when I got the call about Dick in December. I'm going to have to say something on Saturday night when we have the party for the family and our alumni. And other, dignitaries. I don't know how I'm going to get through it, Scott. I really don't. It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
I get emotional just now talking about him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you'll have help, I'm sure, right? I mean, the Phillies.
Well,
Mike
will be there, and Mike Tolan will be there, and I may just kind of at some point turn it over to them and let them try the job that I can't do. But yeah, I mean, I have so much admiration for Dick and his character and his accomplishments that I'm so grateful that he's in. I really am. I can't say that enough. Thank the Hall.
Yeah. Well, John, this was great. I think you know how much I always enjoy talking to you and how thankful we are when you're able to spend some time with us. I know it's going to be an incredible weekend in Cooperstown to celebrate Dick Allen and his legacy.
Yeah.
I think that's really the word, is his legacy. We'll have full coverage of it in the Inquirer, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you about it once you get back. Hopefully you'll be able to enjoy it.
I'll love it.
With Dick's family, and so safe travels to you. Can't thank you enough for sharing a few of your memories of Dick Allen with us here at Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Thanks, Scott. Good to talk to you.
Of course, I want to thank John Middleton again for joining me this week. For our Reporter's Notebook segment, I'll bring in my fellow baseball writer at the Inquirer, Lachlan March. Lachlan, thanks for hopping on.
Thank you for having me. I feel like it's been a while since I've hopped on, so glad to be back.
Well, it's been a while since you and I saw each other, period. You spent last week on the West Coast covering the Phillies in San Francisco and San Diego. I just got back from the All-Star game in Atlanta. I think we might actually be in the same place at the same time for a change on the homestand that's coming up out of the break when the Phillies play the Angels and Red Sox. And so I thought we would do a little tennis-style volley, kind of a back and forth with, a couple of storylines that we'll each be following in the second half. So if that sounds good to you, why don't you start with, something that you're going to kind of be looking at or looking for over the next couple of months?
Well, I guess one thing that's really top of mind is Bryce Harper. I mean, in San Francisco, he had that 4 extra base hit game. Seems like he's kind of turned a corner, I guess, is the right. It was the first, I would say, moment where it was like really Bryce Harper moment for me that I've seen from him this year. He'd been dealing with the wrist inflammation, and I think that had affected his swing even before he hit the injured list. So, but now that has seemed to have cleared up and he's back, I think that game was when we saw the real Bryce Harper. So I'll be watching for the second half if he's here to stay, and if that is, something that the Phillies can count on going forward.
Yeah, that was the game, right, where he said, I know I'm good.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, I don't think anyone disputes that he's good. He's not only good, he's great. I mean, he's one of the best players in the sport, and that's not an exaggeration. He's a future Hall of Famer. I think the concern with him comes with the injury factor, right? The wrist, and how inhibited he might be because of that wrist. And that's the only concern I ever have with him. People always say like, oh, he's going through a homerless stretch, or, he's this or that. And, that never worries me because I think he's always got the ability to put together a stretch where he carries them. Did you get the sense in San Francisco that maybe he was, past the point of like, knocking off some of that rust, or feeling like maybe he had to change his swing because of the wrist and he was ready to let it loose?
Yeah, the biggest thing was all those hits were to opposite field, and that's when you really know that his power is there and his swing is feeling good. And he'd been hitting balls over there even before that. They just weren't falling for hits necessarily, or for extra base hits, because those were the first extra base hits that he had since he came back. But his timing had been just kind of like on the verge, and that's what everyone had been saying leading up to that game. And that game just kind of like was illustrative that he was feeling good. His swing is back. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people really latched on after he came back from the injury the first day when he kind of held court in the clubhouse, and people really latched on to, he said like his wrist was at a standstill and that's why he decided to come back. I think people kind of took that a bit out of context, because he went on to clarify later that day, or later in that scrum that it was a standstill of feeling good. I think just like the word standstill kind of like caused a lot of people to freak out a little bit. And the narrative after that was that, oh, well, Bryce is just coming back because he's not going to get any better. But I do think that that game showed that he's back to where he is, and he wouldn't be playing if he wasn't, because there's no need for the Phillies to rush him now. The most important thing is for him to be okay in October. And that's what the Phillies are just going to have to manage. Like, obviously this injury recurred. They don't want that to happen again, but I don't think that it's currently an issue. And I think that game in SF really showed that.
I'm glad you went Harper, because it always revolves around him. I'm going to go trade deadline, because who doesn't love the trade deadline? So it's July 31st and it's 6 p.m. Eastern for people who want to set their calendar reminders. That's a Thursday. The Phillies are off that day. They'll have just finished a series in Chicago against the White Sox. And look, their needs are familiar, right? They need bullpen help, and they could probably use an outfielder. My sense is that Dave Dombrowski is prioritizing the bullpen. I think he'll look for both things, but I think the bullpen is number one. And for me, there are two teams to watch, the Twins and the Guardians, because both of those teams were under 500 at the break and kind of on the outskirts of the AL wildcard picture. And if they fall much further back in the next 10 days or so, they might have to make some tough decisions about their future and where they're going. If you're the Twins, maybe you move closer Yohan Duran, or even setup man Griffin Jacks. They have Louis Varland in their bullpen. They have Danny Colomb, a lefty, in their bullpen. They have a really good bullpen. And the Guardians could listen on their closer, Emmanuel Clase. And the thing about Duran and Clase, they're both controllable beyond this season. So you're going to have to pay a pretty steep price. And that's where this deadline gets really interesting to me if you're the Phillies, because we know that they're in this win now cycle. And the bullpen was really their downfall, both in the 2023 NLCS and then last year against the Mets in the division series. So I think if ever there was a time for Dombrowski to kind of push one of his big chips into the middle of the table to go get a stud closer, maybe it's right now. Now, I was talking to Kyle Schwarber at the All-Star game, and he was thinking back to 2016 with the Cubs when they traded for Aroldis Chapman, and at the time they gave up one of their top prospects, who was Gleyber Torres, and they wound up winning the World Series. And he said, quote, "We had a really good bullpen, and then all of a sudden we made a trade for Chapman. I just kind of remember what that felt like. You feel like you have guys that can cover those late innings, but then if you add someone like that, you're able to push those guys to the 8th and the 7th inning, and you're like, man, you feel like the bullpen's in a really good spot." So, look, there are plenty of arguments against paying a hefty price for a closer, but there's always a time and a place. And, this might be the time and place that the Phillies decide, hey, we got to go for it. The time is now. This is a thing we need. We've needed it for years. Let's address it. And let's address it with someone we can control beyond this year.
Yeah, I think the controllable piece of it is will be something to watch, just because obviously last year when they got Estevez and he walked, they were in pretty much the same position that they were a calendar year ago. So I think finding a guy that they can control for a season or for two further seasons like that, that might give them some it will prevent them from just falling back into where they are again and where they have been for the past several years, looking for a high leverage arm at the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Duran's case, his contract, his control lines up with the Wheeler window, so to speak, 2027. I really think that's kind of the sweet spot for the Phillies and for this group, for this core, because if you can win a couple, if you can win one, and if you can win a couple, well, then it changes the whole narrative. And then if Aiden Miller, let's say, is the piece you have to move, and he goes on to become an all-star with the Twins, well, you won a couple of World Series with Yohan Duran closing out games for you down the stretch. So it's a lot easier to deal with in that case. I think you wanted to stick with the bullpen theme.
Yeah, I guess kind of complicating this is that Jose Alvarado's return is kind of imminent, and obviously he won't be impacting the postseason bullpen. But right after he was suspended for PED use, I can't even remember May was that when that happened. It's so long ago.
Middle of May.
Rob Thompson was asked, like, would you use him even though you in the rest down the stretch of the season, even though you won't be able, he's ineligible to pitch in the postseason? And Rob said, of course I would, but Alvarado, I think, is eligible off the top of my head. It's like, I think mid-August is when.
Yeah, August 19th sounds familiar to me. I think,
yeah.
I don't know if I've written that or I've read that, but yeah, that sounds like the day to me.
And before that, he can go on a rehab. I guess it's not technically a rehab assignment, but he can go on a minor league assignment to prepare for that. But the interesting thing for me will be to see what he's been up to, what he looks like, how he's throwing. Like Rob Thompson said that he's not in contact with Alvarado, but people in the Phillies organization are, and he has been throwing. But I mean, I'm just interested to see how he'll come back, what kind of mind space he'll be in, and how the Phillies will employ him, and knowing that he will not be able to eat up postseason innings. So they'll have to plan for that while also utilizing him in their bullpen. I just think that'll be an interesting thing to watch when he does return.
Without a doubt, especially because you have 3 lefties in the rotation and you might want to use one of them in the bullpen, in your postseason bullpen. So let's say it's late September and you've either clinched or you're on the verge, and you decide, hey, Jesus Luzardo, when we get into the playoffs, we're going to use you in the bullpen to face, tough lefties, or to take down the 7th inning or the 6th inning. Maybe Alvarado gets sort of pushed to the side a little bit, because you're going to want to see if someone else can do that job. Or maybe you just ride Alvarado right through to the end, because that he's not going to be able to help you in the postseason, but maybe he can help you get there. So it's going to be fascinating to see how they deploy him. And like you said, what he looks like, how he comes back throwing, what has he been doing? And is he in shape to be able to do this?
Right. Yeah. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That had been like the problem with Alvarado, is that, I mean, he'd struggled with his weight, and that is what Dave Dombrowski said led to this. So he came into spring training in great shape and was throwing 100 miles an hour. And so I'm just curious to see what he'll be doing when we see him again.
Yeah. So I'll get to my last one. It isn't July-ish anymore. It's actually July. But, whereas Andrew Painter, I think, his major league debut once sounded inevitable this season, you have to wonder if it's really going to be in the cards, because he's not exactly dominating at AAA. He started the last game before the All-Star break and gave up 3 runs on, I think it was 6 hits, 2 home runs in 5 innings in Syracuse. In 12 AAA starts, he's allowed 60 hits and 20 walks in 55 and 2/3 innings for a 5.01 ERA. I wonder about kind of his headspace, not in the sense that he's bored in AAA or not being challenged, because clearly he is, but he's also 22, and he's heard Dave Dombrowski talk about a July-ish timeline and all of that. And look, you can be the most mature 22-year-old in the world, but I think about when I was 22. If I was 22 and covering high school baseball for the Inquirer, and my editor told me that, and told the world that by July-ish I'd be covering the Phillies, well, I'm probably less invested in writing the best high school stories that I can than I am in looking at the calendar and counting down the days. So, and I'm not saying that's the case for Painter. I just think maybe it's human nature that it would be. And look, as long as the rest of the rotation stays healthy, and with Aaron Nola set to come back in August, I wonder if Painter stays in AAA longer than we expected, especially since that odometer on his innings keeps climbing. He's at 67 now between Clearwater and Lehigh Valley. They haven't disclosed a target number for him, but you'd have to figure it's in the 100 to 120 range, I would imagine. Probably not that much north of that. So we'll see. I mean, I'm more interested in Justin Crawford's timeline, because he's hitting .331 in the first half. The Phillies have a need for more production in the outfield. He's got bat-to-ball skills that are exemplary. And, I think back to – I was talking to Dave Dombrowski the other day, and he said, he reminded me that, not necessarily apropos of Crawford, but just in general, his philosophy on calling up young players. He called up Andrew Benintendi and Rafael Devers in 2016 and 17 with the Red Sox right around the trade deadline. And I wonder if that's kind of a possibility here. Maybe that homestand, that Tigers-Orioles homestand after the deadline, or that long road trip, that 10-day 3-city trip, whether we see him during that stretch, or maybe it's before that. But, I do kind of wonder if Crawford's knocking on the door here even more than Painter.
I think the biggest thing is that's important for when he does make his debut is that it doesn't come at a time when the Phillies are really struggling, and that there's not like a ton of expectations on him to come in and immediately save the team and be, the outfielder of the future right away. I think the Phillies kind of wanted him to experience failure in a sense, and he hasn't really failed that much in AAA. So he hasn't really gotten that experience so far. And obviously AAA is a different beast than the majors. So, he'll have to learn when he gets up here, but they don't really it wouldn't make sense for them to want him to be perceived as the savior. I don't think that would be fair on a prospect like that. And I think that that's the more important thing. So I wouldn't expect to see him come up if the Phillies are in the middle of a big slide or something like that. Just because I don't think that they would want to put those kinds of expectations on him for his first time in the major leagues.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you want to diminish the pressure. If anything, you want him to think, hey, let's just bat ninth and go out there, catch everything in center field and maybe give us some energy, but you don't have to come in here and be someone you're not. So I do wonder whether the time is coming, but I also think they've been deliberate so far. And, look, as much as we say they have a need, and they do have a need, he's a left-handed hitter. He's not really going to be a platoon option. If he comes up, it's going to be to play every day. Max Kepler is a left-handed hitter in the outfield. Brandon Marsh is a left-handed hitter. One of those you would imagine would have to be moved out in order for Crawford to be moved in, which is awfully tricky. That's kind of why I wonder whether it's a deadline-ish kind of thing. Like, let's say you make your moves at the deadline and then you figure out a way to get – it kind of reminds me of 2022 when they made a flurry of moves on deadline day. It was the David Robertson, Brandon Marsh, Noah Syndergaard deadline. And, we don't think about this now because Bryson Stott was already there. But Gene Segura had come back off the IL. Stott moved to short, and they essentially released Didi Gregorius. It was all part of the same deadline, all around the same time. I wonder whether they get to a point where it's like, all right, it's Crawford time, let's go, and they make a move with one of those other guys, whether it's shipping them out or figuring out a way to do it. But you got to figure out a way to get Crawford here and playing every day.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's leave it there. Lachlan, as always, thank you for joining me, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the ballpark in real life during this homestand. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's move to our last segment. We call this Hit and Run, where we take a question from you out there. It's also a good time to mention that you can submit a question by email at slauber@inquirer.com or on the social media platform of your choice. X, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn, you name it, I'm there. So feel free to fire off a question or a comment. Lots of great trade-related questions this week, and we have a few more shows before the deadline, so please keep them coming. This week, we'll take this question from Phil Braxmeyer at P. Braxmeyer on X. And he writes, who are some of the outfield options for the Phillies to trade for? Would they have any interest in Brian Reynolds from the Pirates? Phil, it's a great question. And here's the problem when it comes to fixing the outfield. There aren't a lot of options on the trade market. There really aren't. In part because there are only about 6 teams that will be surefire sellers. Unless you want to take a buy low flyer on someone like Luis Robert Jr. from the White Sox with the understanding that you're not going to pick up his option for 2026, well, go right ahead. But Robert is batting 190 with a 599 OPS through the first half. Reynolds is interesting because he's a 2-time All-Star having a bad year. A few people have mentioned to me that maybe he would be revitalized by getting out of Pittsburgh where they don't do very much winning. But he's owed $77.25 million through 2030. I'm sure the Pirates would want to unload that contract. I just don't know that I'd want to get into a long-term relationship with him, especially given the year he's having. If the Orioles sell, Cedric Mullins could be available. Same with Tyler Ward of the Angels. Adolis Garcia of the Rangers. It's probably a pipe dream that the Guardians would trade Stephen Kwan. Byron Buxton told reporters at the All-Star game that he's a Minnesota Twin for life. So, yeah, not a ton of outfield options, which is another reason why I wonder if the Phillies will eventually just bring up Justin Crawford and see if his bat-to-ball skills and speed can help them. All right, let's leave it there for this week and tell you that every episode, all 23 of them of Phillies Extra, is available at inquirer.com/inquire-live-sports/ or on the Inquirer's YouTube channel or on Facebook. You can also listen to this episode and others, beginning with our Bryce Harper interview, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. While you're there, please give us a follow, rate, and review us. It really does help. Thanks again to my guest, Phillies managing partner John Middleton, and to my colleague Lachlan March. And thanks, as always, to our producer, Angelica Irizarry, who is here every week to make sure that this whole enterprise runs smoothly. Until next week, I'm Scott Lauber. Thanks to everyone for listening, watching, and, of course, for reading the Philadelphia Inquirer.